Thanks for being here, Tom.
Thanks for having me.
Would you mind giving us a rundown as far as the inspiration behind the World Walk and the series of events that led you to taking your first steps?
Yeah, so I was 17. I had a friend who passed away when she was 16, and I had never been close to someone who died before, and it was very formative for me, and it really impacted me. And I think in part because I was 17 and young and impressionable, but I think also because my friend who died, Eurail, was in my mind the nicest person I knew, and so clearly better than me in so many ways. Just was far nicer, was a better student, was more generous, was more driven. And so when she died, it really drove home the fact that, if Anne-Marie could die, then so could I, so could my friends, so could my family. And it left me in this fog for a few months, unsure of how to integrate this fact that I was going to die into my life. And it wasn't until someone played Dead Poet Society in class that I kind of found an answer to your ultimate demise at any moment, which was carpe diem, seize the day, action, all that stuff. And so then I latched on to carpe diem, and I was just doing everything I possibly could at all times. I joined the swim team. I was up at 5 a.m. swimming before school, and then after school I was doing the one act, I was doing the musical, and then after that I would hang out with my friends and be a menace around town and just kind of say yes to everything. And at a certain point I realized after a few months of doing this that you just don't have enough time you just don't have enough time to do everything, and you have to make the most out of life. You actually have to be selective about the things that you want, and you have to set a direction and then stay the course with that. And so when I was thinking about, okay, what do I really want out of this life? I decided that I wanted to travel. I wanted to be forced into adventure because I knew I was timid and introverted, and I wanted to grow out of that, and I wanted to understand the world. And those three things led me down all sorts of internet rabbit holes of looking for ways to Eurail and different cheap ways to travel. And eventually it led me to Steve Newman and Bushby, these two guys who had walked around the world. And once I saw that, it just was the thing that fulfilled everything I wanted. And then it was 8 years of saving and planning and going to school and paying off loans and living at home and everything else until I was able to begin the day before I turned 26.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And in that 8-year stretch of planning and saving and going to school, what kind of adventures did you do to lead you up to that point?
Not too much. Okay, that's good. I thought I hit that accidentally. Not too much. I went to college, and then I just moved back home because really the whole idea, my whole focus was making this World Walk happen. And I had a bunch of student loans, and living at home was the best way to pay that off. And I honestly wasn't much of a hiker before. I did a bit of the Appalachian Trail for like 10 days with a friend, and he was doing half of the trail, so I met up with him. And what I realized from doing those 10 days was that I really hated backpacking. I hated having the 40 pounds on my back, and it was just miserable. So I knew I didn't like backpacking. Somehow I still ended up walking around the world, just not with a backpack. I went to the Dominican briefly with a fraternity brother who his parents had a house down there, so I did that. But I turned down a lot of things as well because I was just trying to save money and pay off loans. So often when people would go out on Friday, Saturday night, I would stay in and I would write, or I would study, or just do anything basically not to spend money and just put everything towards the loans. And then I was putting in solar panels as well. So there's times where we'd work 3 months, nonstop pretty much. And that allowed me to save a lot of money. And then we'd have maybe 2 months off, and I would go to the library every day for 8 hours. I'd write 5,000 words, and then I would do 4 hours of exercises. And so that was kind of my life for a while. I may go to the gym too. There's a gym nearby. I would go to the gym. But that was my life really, probably for years after the walk. It was very very focused on just saving money and trying to give myself the best chance possible to take the first step.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And leading up to the walk, you knew you were going to be doing this the entire time, but could you run us through the instance of getting sponsored and how much time before you took your first steps that was?
Yeah, so the sponsorship was really incredibly fortunate because it was, the owner knew my friend Emery, who passed away. I went to school with his son, and so I had a couple articles written about me maybe like 3 months before I was beginning. I went to this place called the Factory, a maker space in the town over from me, looking for them to kind of modify this cart that I could pull. And the owner of that, Tom Marchetti, was really gregarious and outgoing and was able to promote me in a way that I could never do myself. And so he said, all right, we're going to do like a send-off fundraiser, help you pay off your loans, get some eyes on you, maybe get some sponsors. And so he set up interviews with the Philadelphia Inquirer, with njpen.com. And so he had these articles written, or helped enable that. And then one afternoon, I was working a job at a restaurant and then at an insurance firm. So I was doing like these two jobs to save money. And I was at this restaurant and I got a message that from Brian Mehmet, the son of the owner of the Philadelphia Sign, was like, hey, my dad and I just read your article. He says he'd love to sponsor your whole trip. And I was like, what? As read it 20 times, and when can we meet up? And so for them it was advantageous because they didn't have to pay much, but they get some notoriety, and they also just opened an international branch, so they were looking for something to promote that. And then they also donated $1 a mile into Emory's scholarship fund, which was fantastic. So it was really, really serendipitous, and that probably happened maybe a month before I left. That connection was made, maybe 2 months before. Can't quite remember. And I went from basically having this big chunk of money that I thought I was going to be able to bleed out for 2 years, paying off loans, living on rice and beans, never getting a hotel room, and hopefully getting a sponsor over those 2 years, to getting a sponsor right before, and then being able to throw all the money from my my savings against my student loans, but then have basically a paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. And so when I left, I had, I think maybe like $1,000 in my bank account, but I didn't have any student loans, and I had that little bit of money coming in, so that I could live off of.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you get sponsored, you take off, leave the hometown of Philadelphia. Could you run us through the first however many months until you met your companion, Savannah?
Sure, yeah. So I walked out my front door, walked over the Ben Franklin Bridge, through Philadelphia, along the Schuylkill River Trail, and then kind of turned south along the East Coast. And the first 4 months was a real crash course on just how to do the basics out in the world, how to live out of the baby carriage, actually I didn't have the baby carriage at that point. I had an even bigger kind of like ice cream cart that weighed so much and broke 3 times in the first month. But I realized I was carrying way too much, and even though I was an athlete my whole life, walking 15 plus miles a day was more than my body was used to. I just didn't have those muscles developed, and so it took me maybe a month until I was doing 24 miles every day consistently. So that was one of the things that I needed to get up to speed on. And then how much food do I eat? How much water do I bring? Where do I find a place to sleep each night? That was like a constant, especially the first 4 months, 5 months down to Mexico. One of the most useful things about that was just I got much better at finding a place to hide away each night. And in the beginning, it was really challenging, and I would camp in these places where maybe I'd get woken up, or someone would find me in the morning, or there's too many mosquitoes, or it would rain and it would get flooded out. All sorts of little things that you just get much better at it with practice. And I had this one strange encounter in particular in Georgia. Another thing about those first few months was like learning how to protect myself in a certain way. And I grew up in a very safe, calm suburbia and never really had to worry for my safety. And I'm a guy, so I never had to develop, like that creep sense that girls have to develop. And I didn't realize didn't have that developed until I met this guy in Georgia who was very creepy, and that helped me really grow in a way and learn to ignore this pressure to be polite and just not offend anyone versus defending myself, not defending myself, but trusting your gut kind of thing. And I think, right, for females, it's something they develop pretty early on, where if you get a bad vibe from someone, you can kind of just, you sense that and you walk away. But I didn't have that developed at the time. And so that was kind of the first real lesson in, sometimes it's okay to be rude if you get a bad sense from someone, and just cut that off and move on. And as the years went on, I got really good at that, because I knew I was meeting people every day, and I knew I would meet someone down the road that I would trust immediately. We would just get that vibe, and you would trust inherently, no problem. So if I got a weird vibe from someone, I later just had no problem just cutting it off. Don't want anything to do with you. And then, because I knew later on I'd meet someone. But that was the first instance. And after I met this guy, and from camping in all these strange places, I kept thinking over this first 4 or 5 months that, man, it'd be really nice to have a dog that could listen while I was sleeping, that could maybe sense these things in other people. And so when I got to Austin, Texas, I guess after 4.5 months of walking or so, my cousin was there. Her husband was doing his PhD candidacy. And the first day I thought, I got nothing going on. They're both at work. I'm gonna go to this adoption center, check it out, kind of just play with this idea, not really expecting to get a dog. And then I spent 2.5 hours there walking around, meeting with these dogs, kind of just hanging out. And I wasn't vibing with any of them. And I'm about to leave, and then so I'm gonna take one more lap, see if I connect with any of these dogs. And then as I started this lap, they brought out Savannah and her sister, who were just little puppies, 3-4 months old. And I asked to see Savannah, whose name was Lulu at the time when I adopted her. And I thought, oh man, she's so sweet, and she's a little like meaty, so I think she'll grow into a good size. But I thought, oh man, you can't adopt a puppy. It's too crazy. It's just, you just can't do it. You're gonna. It's already difficult enough to live on the road, and now you're gonna bring a puppy into this. And I'm gonna be entering Mexico with a puppy. Like, this is insane. So I put her back, and I thought, I'll think about it for a day. And right as I was about to leave, like as I was leaving, this other woman who I think just comes there and would hang out there every day, just hang out with the dogs, she stopped me and said, if you leave, she'll be gone. The puppies never last. And so she kind of forced my hand, and I'm really thankful for that. And so I thought, it's going to be a pain getting a puppy early on, but ultimately it'll pay off, because she'll grow up on the road, and it'll be the only life she knows, and she'll be perfectly adapted to it. And so I adopted her, and then the rest is history, where she grew up on the road, and it was the perfect life for her.
And how did your relationship with her and her comfortability on the road develop over the years?
Yeah, so in the beginning, the first month when we were walking from Houston down to Reynosa, Mexico, I was really frustrated at first, because I finally got into a rhythm, and I'm banging out these miles, and I knew how much food to have and how much water to have. And now I have this puppy, and she's throwing everything off, and she's terrified of cars, and she hates the leash, and I couldn't get her to walk more than a couple feet. And so I had to switch my priorities, basically, from doing X amount of miles each day to training Savannah and then getting in whatever I could after that. So I would train her in the morning, and then basically whenever I stopped, I'd do a little training with her. And over the month, eventually, by the time we got down to the Mexican border, she was walking the full 24 miles a day with me, and she was still really young, but I would put her in the cart and she didn't want to be in there. She would hop out. It's like, all right, she wants to walk, so she's walking. And then when we got into Mexico, I almost didn't even really think of her at all. I mean, I did, of course, but I was also just being so inundated with newness and with stress, and how do I navigate these cities that I don't really know how to process, with a baby carriage and with a puppy, and defend myself, and in my mind. And if I went back now, it'd obviously be totally different. But in the beginning, it was so stressful, and I don't think it was really until Guatemala, it wasn't until I got through Mexico that I really started to appreciate Savannah. I remember sitting in this field with her in like Oaxaca, somewhere down there, Oaxaca, and thinking, oh, like, I love this little bugger. We'd made it through 3 months of this, or 4 months of this, and that was the first time I really looked at her and was like, oh, she's a beast, kind of thing. And she got through all this, and then as the years went on, it was like we just became perfectly synced up. And there's times where she provided a lot of stress because I would worry about her, and we would get attacked by strays all the time because we'd go by their territory and they come out barking at Savannah. So a lot of times it was stressful defending her, and making sure we had enough water, and I always had food for her, and then I'm arguing her case whenever I would get to a hotel or get to a border. And so I was really her protector, I think, more than she was for me. But it was so incredible also to have a companion there with me through everything. And especially at night when we would camp or we'd get into a hotel, it really allowed me to bask in the joy of being wherever we are, and thinking how far we came. And I would just, go over to her and, say, like, oh, that was a tough one, huh? That kind of thing, or made it. And there's just so many, we'd get to these hotels and get like 2 twin beds, and if it was really hot, she would go under the bed where it's nice and cool. She would do that. Or if it wasn't so hot, she'd go on the bed, lay her head on the pillow. I'd be on my bed, my head on the pillow, and just exhausted. So there's a lot of those moments. And then, as the years went on, like when we got into the US, we had been walking together for so long at that point that even if we were on a big road, I could have had her walking with her ear just brushing my calf for 8 hours a day, off leash. When she was working kind of thing. And then as soon as we would turn off, I could say, go ahead. And she would, then she knew she could, okay, run around, zig and smell and whatever else. When we were, my fiance and I were driving across the country from Seattle to here, her dad was a long haul trucker, and has one of these big trucks, so he moved us out, and we went out, drove across the country with him. And in the morning he took Savannah and Bonnie's dog Cleo for a walk, and when he came back, he's like, Tom, I saw her in work mode, where he started walking, she goes right over to the side, wouldn't walk in the middle of the road, walks right along the edge of the road, and then it's just straightforward, ears back, tail up, and just kind of on a mission. So yeah, she was like a working dog, that was her job, and she did it very well.
Very, very cool to hear how that progressed over time.
Yeah.
I know when you did go down to Mexico and started exploring Central America, learning Spanish was a really big focus. So could you touch on your studies in Spanish while you're down in Mexico and Central and South America, and then also how you studied languages in other countries and how many languages you may know today?
Sure. Yeah, I only know one really. I mean, I'm sure Spanish would come back quickly, but it's been years since I've spoken it. Last time I spoke it really was when I was in Spain, and that was 5 years, maybe longer than 5 years ago at this point. But yeah, so I had taken French in high school for some godforsaken reason, and said Spanish was so impractical. But like as an American, you get a little bit of Spanish just from osmosis. Some words. I worked in the restaurant business, so I would speak a little bit with this guy Armando. He would give me a little bit of Spanish, but not much. And then when I started walking, I would study. Initially I had flashcards. I was like, this is insane to be carrying flashcards. I threw those out. So then I got on Duolingo, and I got put onto oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name now. There's this great language study guide. Michel Thomas is his name, Michel Thomas. And so I started listening to that, and he has this really fantastic way of kind of breaking down the structure of a language and almost giving you like 1,000 words in one go, where you go, okay, like any word, you know, with ante is, you know, in Spanish is ing basically. So interesante, whatever, you know. So he had this really easy way of breaking it down and kind of giving you a lot very quickly. And then it's just a matter of like learning some vocabulary around that. But it allows you to kind of start playing with the language a little bit. But you know, so I studied down the US, but really all the studying is kind of basically useless once you actually get to a place and then you're having a conversation. It's happening in real time really quickly. I remember having studied for so long and then sitting in this gas station on like my second day in Mexico, and this guy's talking to me. I'm like, I have no idea what this guy's saying, and I just studied Spanish for months. But once you're in it, you learn really quick. You're around it all the time, and you screw up. And when you're going into a convenience store or whatever, or a hotel, you just, okay, how do I say this? How do I say this? How do I say this? And then you screw it up, and then you never forget it again. So it's this trial by fire helps you learn very quickly. And so down the Americas, I got very good. You know, by the time I was in Uruguay, I was very, very strong conversationally. You know, I could have very deep, meaningful relationships with people in Uruguay that I met. You know, I had cousins there, so I spent a month there, but I made friends only in Spanish down there, which is something before would have been, you know, impossible. I just wouldn't have been able to, you know, hold that depth of ideas. And then as it went on, I used Michel Thomas again for French, for Italian. I don't think he had it for Turkey. He had it for Russian, but I was never in a place long enough where I could get as good in a language as I did for Spanish. You know, French was France and Algeria, so I got okay at it. It's pretty similar to Spanish, pretty similar to English. Italian is very similar to Spanish, so I got okay at Italian pretty quickly. But I was only there for 90 days, so it's not like you get incredible. And also, you know, there's a lot of English speakers, so you can kind of get away with not speaking Italian or French. Algeria was tougher. Algeria actually forced my hand on French more than France did, because there was less English speakers in Algeria. And then when I got up to the Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and then over to Uzbekistan, not Kyrgyzstan because my guide spoke English pretty well, but for the other countries, I had to learn some Russian because that was kind of their fallback language. That was their second language, where it wasn't worthwhile for me to learn Kyrgyz or Uzbek when everyone spoke Russian as well. That was more the bonding language, and so I tried to learn a little Russian, but you know, I only learned a little bit, enough for the very basics kind of thing. I was never having a philosophical conversation in it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just curious, I mean, traveled for 7 years, boiled it down into a 280-page book. So what percentage out of, you know, your experiences were you able to cover in the World Walk?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, 0% basically. It's, you know, impossible to totally convey it. And I mean, even in my mind, I probably remember, you know, 0.1% of it. There's just, when you're there and you're living it, there's so many little things I'm sure I forget about, and kind of all the time when I think about this, I'll have these little memories pop up in my head that I, you know, forgot about, or just these moments of, you know, sitting on the corner of some tienda or some small interaction I had with a fisherman or something like that you forget about for the most part, but then something will bring it back up into your head. And I also, what's strange is though, if I like street viewed, if I street view or if I like look at my journals, the whole day comes back immediately, like a rush, you know. So it's hard to recall, but easier to remember once something sparks it. But yeah, I mean, with the book, I think this is something that I learned through photography. When I was walking, photography was the hobby because it was kind of the only thing I could do on the move. It was a very low lift, and I didn't really have to have much internet to post at the end of each day. And it was just kind of this natural thing where I've seen interesting things and, I want to share them. So that's, how I got into it. And as I realized I could take good photos, I remember in Mexico, I would, I took a photo and I was so surprised. It was like a decent photo of a bull in this wheat field. And I was like, how did that get in my camera? And I was like, oh, man, I can replicate this and take more good photos. So then I started getting into it, and once I got better at it, I started studying photography more and taking it more seriously. And one of the things that you learn, and I'm sure this is with anything, but I think photography is a great example where I think everyone has this experience of you see a beautiful moon or you're on a beach vacation and you go, wow, this is so beautiful, and I take a photo of this. And you take a photo and you look at it and you go, what is this? This is not even close to what I'm feeling or replicating what I'm seeing. And so this thing that you realize is that to get better at photography, you're really learning kind of that it's just a translation. And so you're kind of translating this beauty, and it's not a one-to-one. There are things that you will see that will be very beautiful to you, but just do not translate to a photograph. And so you have to start looking for photographs rather than just maybe beauty necessarily. You got to look for foreground, mid-ground, background. You have to look for the way things are, if there's movement, how the lights fall, and all these different things. And writing a book is the same thing, where there are just limits on it, and you can't tell every story, and you can't express everything that you felt in every moment because you just weren't there. You are trying basically, ultimately, with a book is just to convey one idea. And then even in every moment, you're just trying to get across one idea. And then even through that, when someone is reading the book, they're going to bring their own experiences, their own biases to it. And words are kind of softer than you realize. And so you have to be really precise with your words and have to be concise with your words to try and give whatever you were feeling in that moment as accurately as possible. And so with the book, all I was trying to do, well, I was trying to do a few things, but the main, the through line, the thread was I was just trying to share my growth. And so when I started writing the book, it was, okay, how did I grow? What was this, then this, then this, then this, and then, okay, let's find a story for each one of these ways that I grew, and then tie those stories together, and hopefully that gives the reader a sense of my growth. So that was the story I was trying to tell. And there was, other stories that I would have loved to have shared in the book, but they just didn't fit with that narrative, or maybe they were redundant, and there was something I already wrote that basically did the same thing. So you don't want to repeat that; it slows the things down for the reader. So it was really, I would say, thankfully, when I was on the last leg of the walking from Seattle to Philadelphia, that was very much this cathartic, grieving almost 7 months, where I was able to process everything I had gone through and how much I changed, and then look at my own country with a new viewpoint. And so I was really able to process, I think, the walk during those last 7 months. And so when I came to the book, I wasn't really looking to, for it to give me anything. I was just trying to make it as entertaining a read as possible for the writer. So I think if I had written it in a different mindset, maybe I would have put in, a little more details or something. But, this way I was just like, how do I make this as entertaining as possible for the reader? And part of that is just making it concise and quick and a single narrative.
Very cool. Very cool. Could you think of what's the first story that pops into mind that was extremely enthralling, really exciting, that just didn't fit the narrative that you could share right now? Well, there's a couple, but I guess when you came to the talk at Roebling, I think I shared one of, I met this cyclist, Shane, after I was in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. I got a little stomach bug, and I was kind of against this tree, and just my stomach killing me, and I looked 3 trees down, and there's this other guy who has a stomach bug too, this cyclist, and we had this great interaction, and we kind of saw
the world in the same way, which is really rare, where we were just looking, okay, like what's the population density, how easy is it to find a place to sleep, what's the water like, what are the tiendas like, what are the restaurants like, what kind of, how quality is the food. And so we saw the world in the same way, we're both interacting with it in the same way, and so we had this really strong connection. And then he went off to Fuego, this mountain volcano, and I kept walking, and then a few days later I'm at this little tienda having a Coca-Cola on a very hot day, and he rolls by, and so then we were spending some time together, and you know, ended up getting a hotel and sharing dinner, and you know, just like we're able to bond. And later I met up with him in Cusco as well, and that was like, it was an interesting story in a certain way, and also there's some details in that story that I think I would have loved to have given the reader. Like, for example, this weird thing in Guatemala, in rural Guatemala, where when you get to a tienda, if you ask for agua, they give you Coca-Cola. And you have to get water, you have to say agua porta. And I was like, that is such a weird thing, because, you know, Coca-Cola is the same price as water, and there's not a lot of potable water. So everyone would go to the store to get drinkable water. And when Coca-Cola was the same price, the word for water basically just came to denote Coca-Cola. And I was like, man, you know, I would love to add that in the book to give the reader that like little insight into the world and that little quirk. And I had the whole story written and had some nice details in there. But, you know, and also I thought Shane was very interesting, but it just didn't add much to the overall narrative. So we ended up cutting it. And then another story that comes to mind, it's Central America again, was in Nicaragua. I stopped for the night at a brick foundry, and there was a bunch of these all over the country. They're kind of, you know, mom and pop run, and probably just pop run, and outdoor. It's very dry there, and they had their kilns, and they'd be firing these bricks, and then they'd lay them out in these neat rows to dry in the sun. And at the end of the day, this guy's leaving on horseback, and I say, oh, like, is this yours? He says, no, it's not mine. I work there. I was like, well, you think I could sleep there? And he's like, yeah, whatever. And like, I don't care. And so he goes off, and I end up sleeping below this tin roof, you know, open air awning. And then I wake up at maybe 4:30 in the morning, something like that, and I see people trying to get into this lock where they keep all the tools and everything like that. And I'm like, oh man, like, what did I do? I'm gonna have to, like, I could stay here and probably stay hidden, and, you know, I'm in the dark. They're probably not, there's no reason to come over here. But then I'm thinking, you know, they're nice enough to, you know, allow me to sleep here. And also I've had so much generosity. So there's been so many times going through Central America where people found me on their land or offered me a place to sleep or gave me food. It's like, I feel like I need to give something back and, you know, maybe scare these people off. So then I got my mace and I got a flashlight and my knife, and we like go over to the edge of the shadow, and there's 3 guys over there, and I shine my flashlight on them as bright as I can, and I don't say anything because I know if I say anything, then they're gonna hear my accent and they're gonna know I'm just a gringo in there. And they're holding their hands to their eyes, and one guy starts walking over and he's, you know, saying, what do you want? What do you want? Who are you? Kind of thing. And Savannah's next to me, and she's got her hackles up, and then eventually the guy gets close enough along. I can't remember exactly what I said, but basically like gave myself away, and he's like, oh, this was like a gringo, and then the guy, like a second later, they got the lock undone with a key. They had their key, so they were workers who were just there super early. I thought they were thieves, and then so then I'm talking to them, and they're like, yeah, we're workers, we're trying to get in, but it's like, thank you for trying to, you know, protect this place. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna go back to bed, and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. So it was like, the story of that, I think, was a fun story that I had in there initially. I can't remember what other story I have in El Salvador. I have something similar where like it just didn't add much to the overall narrative. It was like an interesting thing that happened, but it doesn't show any growth in any way, I guess, really. Maybe it does, but it didn't in this narrative, so I ended up not sharing it. But yeah, that's 2 of the examples.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And this was mentioned in like the epilogue of the book, just for a brief moment, but you did ayahuasca in Peru.
Yeah.
Could you touch on your journey leading up to that experience, if it was calling you in or if it was something that happened right in the moment?
Yeah, it was more organic. So when I was in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, I stayed there for, I think, 2 weeks, and I made some good connections with people. I was staying at this hostel, taking Spanish lessons every day, and I met this guy, Ko, who was from South Africa, and he was studying with the Shipibo Indians in Iquitos, Peru, to be a shaman, but he needed to leave for a few months until he could come back with a fresh visa, basically. And he's like, yeah, when you get to Peru, let me know, and I'll take you to with our tribe, and we'll do an ayahuasca ceremony. And so as I was getting down, months later, maybe a year later, I'm in Lima, and I messaged Ko, maybe even before, and say, hey, I'm gonna be in Lima this range month. And normally to go out there with him, and he worked with this really traditional, pure, this guy, Ko, was like this guy who I would trust with my life, a heart of gold, very pure. And so he's working with this tribe that's very traditional, does everything traditional way, makes the ayahuasca as it's meant to be made, and there's a lot of counterfeits in that area. And their tribe is just out in the jungle. So you go out there, you're out there. And so I reach out to him, and normally it's something like, thousands of dollars to go on one of these trips. And he's like, oh, we have this Romanian group of 10 people who's doing a group trip for a week. We'll just latch you onto that. I was like, yeah, fantastic. So I flew with Savannah. Savannah came to the jungle too with me. And she had again all these like little midges. They had some little bug out there that was just biting her. She had all these little bites on her. It was terrible, but she got through it and it was fine. But so I ended up spending a week out there outside of Iquitos with Ko and the Shipibo tribe, and I did ayahuasca 3 times. And I think the first time I threw up so quickly. You drink it, it looks like a mocha almost, cappuccino maybe, tastes like vomit, and then just almost like expands in your stomach, and it's really acidic. And unless you're a shaman, you're gonna throw up at some point. It's just a matter of, you're gonna throw up in 5 minutes, or you're gonna throw up in half an hour. And the first time I did it, I threw up so quickly that I got some like a good buzz, but I didn't really hold it down. I didn't take the full effect. But the second and third time, I was able to hold it down longer, and it was a fantastic experience. I would say it's very similar to. Also, we're doing it at night, so you sit in a semicircle at night, and the shaman is singing, and you hear the sounds of the jungle around you. But I would say that the experience is very similar to that phase when you're falling asleep and you're just starting to dream, but you're still kind of awake. I think it's that for like 4 hours, where your thoughts are really, really hyper visualized, where it kind of feels like you're watching all your thoughts on this, 600-inch television screen movie theater. And I could see how if you had some PTSD, or if you have some trauma to work through, it'd be really useful, because you're able to look at your thoughts without the emotion attached. You look at them from kind of a step back, and you can see yourself from the outside a little bit. And so maybe that helps you detach your emotions. But I would say even the more, and I would actually ayahuasca was fantastic. It wasn't, I thought going into it that it was going to change me and alter me permanently, but it's just yourself. I mean, it was much less almost dramatic than I was expecting it to be. And so, yeah, I would say it has this reputation, and it is a psychedelic, but I don't think it's as truly aggressively intense as it's perceived. But anyway, I'd say the more amazing part of ayahuasca was the next day. You go to bed, and then when I'd wake up the next day, it felt like I was 15 again, where it's, as you grow up and as time goes on, your brain just learns to zone out or just ignore certain things. when you're younger, everything is new and magical, and you know a little kid, and everything catches their eye because everything's amazing. But as you get older, your field of view, your field of focus narrows, and you go, okay, your brain knows this is important. These other things are just whatever in the background. But after the ayahuasca in the morning, it's like your field of view expands, and all of a sudden you are seeing your peripheries again for the first time, and you're hearing the birds that you didn't hear before, and the grass is greener. And that went on for maybe like 5 hours or something after I woke up, every time after the ayahuasca, and it was so like beautiful and reminiscent of what it was like to be young, and also feels like this, you're almost primed to rewire whatever wiring you want to, where just there's more possibilities. So it seems like whatever wiring is in your brain is ready to be rejiggered a little bit more than usual. So that was really beautiful as well. But it was a fantastic experience. Kind of unexpected to make that connection, to go out there. That was never the plan, but I was open to having the experience, and it was great.